Hi, I'm Liz Whiteacre, and I know you have been writing a lot of poems. So today we're going to turn our attention to how do we evolve them and prepare them to share with our readers. So here are some tips for preparing for feedback and the start of the revision process. Our goals today are to think about the many different ways we can shape poems after we have our initial drafts on the page. We're going to take a look at revision prompts, the closed drawer strategy, and how we can set up efficient record keeping strategies to make sure that we are keeping track of our poem's progress. If we think about ourselves as guides or engineers or builders, as we did when we were constructing poems and making choices to ensure that our vision, our message, the emotion, the experience that we want to communicate to readers is as solid as possible. We want to keep that same spirit and same intention as we start to take a look back at poems once they have landed on the page. So we never want to lose sight of the end goal, creating a beautiful, meaningful experience for our readers. And so it can be really easy to have a lot of fun during the revision process and make a bunch of changes. But in the end, even though things might seem cool, or we might explore or experiment so much that our poems start to lose their original intention, we need to come back to what do I hope readers get out of this experience? And are the choices I'm making setting both myself as the poet and readers up for success? Something you can do to prepare yourself emotionally, practically for revision is to think about generally maybe your approach to these things in your body of work, and then also individually with the poems that you would like to focus on during this revision period. So thinking about how you hope to use shape and form. How do you want the poems to look visually on the page so that, again, you can set that intention and make sure that the choices you're making during revision are helping you achieve those goals? Also, think about your intentions for imagery and leaps. Are you a poet like me, where maybe you're more likely to get a narrative down on the page or capture a moment of intense observation or get a thought or an emotion down? And then you might need to go back and spend a little bit more time thinking about how to take those abstract things and make them concrete for readers. So I personally find my first drafts are very large, very sloppy, focus a little bit more on action in a poem. And then during the revision process, I go through and prune, really think about how I can use imagery, leaps, the sound, the structure. Those are both important too, in order to produce an end product that's going to communicate that initial intention, but do so in a way that readers are going to find very satisfying. Usually, what comes out of my brain initially is not necessarily reader ready. So I like to take a little bit of time before I share with other people. Whereas you might be a totally different type of writer. You may spend days, months, years with a poem in your head, writing it over, really thinking and thinking and thinking. And so, what you put on the page as your starting point might be very close to that product that's ready to share with a reader and get feedback right away. You might not need to take as much time on the page to play around personally with revision before sharing with a reader because you've already done that work in your head before you even started to put fingers to keyboard or pen to page. So everybody's going to be very different. And as you're preparing for this, again, you're thinking about how am I inviting readers into this poem, into this space, into my heart, mind, and soul, And that can involve just the initial visual shape, that can involve the title, where maybe it's placed in a particular body of work that you're working on. Also, those first few lines are going to welcome your readers in, thinking about the journey that you want readers to take, and also where do you want them to arrive at the end of the poem. What is going to be the takeaway for them after they've experienced what it is you're sharing with them? Something that I like to spend time with is the idea of a revision prompt. So, just like we've explored prompts for coming up with ideas for writing poems, we can also use prompts to help us manipulate things in our poems in order to explore some different things. Let's say I have written a poem and it is first person, past tense, and spends a lot of time thinking about what I've got going on in my head and my heart. What I could choose to do is say, change the point of view in that poem. If I go from first person, I see this and feel this, to second person, you see this and feel this, or a little bit more distant third person, she, he, they see this and feel this, it can create a very different mood, a different sense of intimacy. So, just the pronouns that you're choosing to use in your poem, if the perspective is coming from a speaker, we think about a person talking to us from the first person point of view. If it is being directed at the reader, you, then that can feel totally different. And sometimes you also feels more intimate, as though the speaker I is talking to you. And as a reader, I'm more eavesdropping because perhaps this is an intimate relationship where I and you are kind of having a conversation, or this message is to this specific person. And as a reader, I can witness that and maybe put myself and my you into the poem. So second person can be used in a lot of different ways. And then third person as well. Sometimes, we kind of distance, we change our perspective, just like we do in fiction and creative nonfiction and in film, where we're kind of coming up and looking down and observing at things outside, and we might be getting internal thoughts and feelings in very different ways. So something like that, or shifting from past tense to present tense, right? Just like you would give yourself some challenges writing the poem, you can give yourself some challenges revising the poem. Why not flip it upside down? Why not change the title? Why not change the form? So in that exploration, you're essentially creating a proof of concept, like we're thinking about in the sciences, where in trying out a couple different experiments, we're either one, showing ourselves that the original choice is the best choice at this moment in time, or we might be opening a door and showing ourselves, oh, there's something there that I need to explore, right? That is an idea worth pursuing. Also, I feel that revision prompts can help us develop our ideas. Sometimes we have an initial flash and we get our idea down on the page, but we don't really know how we feel about it yet. We don't really know what to make of it as a person and as the writer. And so sometimes going through some revision prompts, or asking ourselves some questions, what's the point of this, is one that I'll ask often. Like, oh, that's pretty, or that's an interesting observation, but why would you want to share this with people? So that can help us develop our idea, develop what it is we want to communicate with readers. Our guts are saying, hey, this is important. And so sometimes going through this personal revision process before we share it with other people can help us develop that, help us clarify what it is we want to share, and then that can help us, yes, this is exactly the right choice, or oh, well, actually maybe I want to do something a little bit differently to help support that new message. And it can also help us prune. Sometimes we will, in the rush to get our ideas on the page, we'll not think a lot about our language choices, and maybe we'll write out, oh, I feel it, right, it's including a lot of words that could be pruned from the poem. And if we think about the economy of language, the efficiency. When we think about meter, and we maybe think about rhyme, and we're thinking about developing different types of imagery and leaps. In that revision process, we might find that we're moving from something that feels a little bit more like a diary entry or a story, and towards something a little bit more lyrical. So doing some revision prompts can help us explore and make decisions. The closed drawer strategy can be really helpful in this. I just mentioned that sometimes we don't know what it is we're trying to discover or share, what sort of epiphany the speaker is having in the poem, because as the poet, as the writer, we're not entirely sure ourselves. So sometimes we need a little bit of time to process what we've put on the page, and maybe even a little bit of time to live our lives and gain new experiences, different perspectives, to be able to go back and finish poems. So the idea of the closed drawer strategy is to give ourselves permission to set a poem aside, tuck it in a drawer, right? Slide it into your computer file and not touch it for a little while. It can be as short as a couple of days, a couple of weeks, goodness, could be few years, maybe 10 years go by, and finally you're like, oh, now I'm ready to finish that poem. Now I know how that poem ends. Now I know that I'm going to have this poem, but this is how it's going to be resolved. So allowing for personal growth, evolution as a poet sometimes can create really meaningful, beautiful, exciting changes in poems. It just takes a little bit more time than, well, I have a deadline, I need this poem done tomorrow, bam, let's do it. So using revision prompts as well as giving poems some time to percolate, if you will, to steep, it can be beneficial as well. Now, it is an age where many of us are creating poems directly on our computers in maybe our word processing softwares. Maybe we're doing it in notes. And it can be very easy to go into your file and keep working on a poem, saving. And if you're always going into the original file, then you are not preserving that very first initial idea you had, or maybe some subsequent ideas. And perhaps you're starting with 50 lines and you get it whittled down to 10, and you realize, oh, you know, I'd really like to be able to go back to that one part I cut up. Maybe that's another poem, and you don't have that part anymore. So thinking about saving drafts. Now you don't want, 500 copies of the same poem on your computer taking taking up memory space. But I do think it is helpful to, if you're planning a significant revision, you know, resaving your file. I personally will like to save the file with the title of the poem and then the date that I'm making those modifications. Um, Other people might say, draft one, draft two, draft three. If it is a moment where you're saying, oh, this poem is ready and I'm going to submit this for publication, you could say, final. I always hesitate to use the word final. I'm never finished. But you can kind of notate that this was the version that was sent to, if it's a specific magazine, or maybe sent out for publication on a particular date. And you can find that helpful. Sometimes we never go back. The evolution of the poem feels wonderful, and it's awesome, and we are really pleased. But other times we might realize we've lost something in revision, overzealous changing of things, because it can be a lot of fun, and really rewarding. And so it's important to consider preserving at little rest stops along the way, so that you can go back to those if you need to. Another thing that I will personally do is, I call it a slop file, because I just slop things in there, and it's a big mix of stuff, kind of thinking about when you're getting together all of your leftover foods in the kitchen and preparing to take those out to your pig, or in our case, chickens. The slop file can be really helpful, where I might be removing something from a poem that I like because I feel that it doesn't belong there. It doesn't serve that moment. But oh, I really like those two lines. I'll take that and put it into my slot file and come back to it at another point of time or as a prompt. Maybe I'll take those two lines and write a new poem from that. So that can be another way to save little gems along the way that aren't fully formed poems yet. And having a little space to put those can be really fun and rewarding, especially on a particular day where you're not feeling like writing. You can go into your slot file and pull something out and start to work with it. It's also important that you have a system for saving. How are you going to keep track of these files? Where are they going to live on your computer? Or do you prefer to keep a paper copy? Maybe you'd like to print off poems periodically rather than saving multiple drafts on your computer. That can be a great way too, but where are they going to live? So make sure that you come up with a system that you will use. It's easy for you to follow and intuit. So if you're looking for a poem from 4 years ago, you think, oh, it's probably here. Maybe you have a consistent way of saving files. Maybe you use different types of folders, even Excel spreadsheets. That can be a poet's really good friend. But set up something that you'll use and will help you keep track. So that way you are an organized poet who can grab things as needed. We are going to take a few moments to practice. So grab a piece of paper and a writing utensil, and let's make a plan. What kind of record system could you start this week? What's going to work for you? So, first, I'd like you to think about, do you need to do paper copies like we see in this filing system here? Or are you going to be saving things digitally? Make a commitment right now. All right. Now, what kind of a person are you? Are you somebody who's going to have meaningful file names and everything's going to be listed in a role? Or are you somebody who's going to need to create a lot of folders like I do? So make a commitment. What are you going to try out? And now those folders may be, if you're doing hard copies, maybe tabs like this where you're thinking about putting the poem's name and then different versions of the poems in there, or it could be on the computer. How are you going to save those files? Give yourself a little plan to follow. It's much easier to implement the plan if you've thought about it a little bit than just being like, oh yeah, I need to do that. Yeah, I need to do that. Right? So giving yourselves 3 actionable steps and saying, I'm going to do this by Friday can make a big difference. So you know if you're doing digital, hard copy, or a combination of both. You now know how you're going to set up your files. If you're doing digital, are you going to save it on your hard drive or you're going to use something like Google Drive? That might be helpful to set up as well. And then give yourself a date. Schedule a time for yourself right now. When are you going to set this up? Because it may mean collecting from different places on your computer or around your working space where you have stuff printed out. And so right now, schedule a time. When are you going to get this done? Some things you can do this week to practice what we have talked about today. Select a current poem that you've written and do some revision prompts. Try them out. And you can also, in addition to that, return to a poem that you wrote a while ago. Maybe it was last year. Maybe it was when you were in middle school. And go way back. Sometimes it can be fun to go back to stuff you wrote many years ago when you were a different person, because often you may have a poem to write in response to that person, or maybe your poem becomes about like, this is how I used to feel, this is how I feel now. So spend some time looking at an older poem that you've written that has been kind of in a closed drawer for a while and see what that revision experience is like. You can do some revision prompts based on it, or you could also just kind of dig in and read and make little tweaks as you go and put your saving strategy to work. Make it so next week you are a poet with a saving strategy moving forward. Here is a revision prompt for you to try. This one is funky and fun, and I will do it myself when I've written a poem and I'm like, hey, that's pretty good. Right? Like, whoa, it's rare. It's kind of one and done. I'm coming to the writing backwards prompt. Or I'll do this for a poem that I am just really dissatisfied with. It's been bugging me. I'm not sure what to do with it. And another reason why I might come to this prompt is if I'm not sure what my message is in the poem. I've started maybe with an image or a situation, but I'm not sure what I feel about it yet. So, those are three great types of poems to pick for this particular prompt. So, you select the poem, and then, and this works way better in a digital format, in my opinion, with copy and paste, but you can handwrite it. Rewrite the poem from the bottom up. So start very literally. Take that last line, make it the first. Second to last line, make it the second, right? So you're literally taking the poem and turning it on its head. Then go through and revise to help it make sense. So you're starting at the end and moving back towards the beginning. And oftentimes this will uncover a revelation. It can be a really fun technique to start with kind of what's been realized and then move back to the time before that was known. So you're kind of working with hindsight there. It can be a lot of fun. And often writers who try this, poets will say, oh, now I've got two poems that I really like, right? Because they've ended up so different. Sometimes the meaning of the poem changes when you flip it on its head. So give this a try and see how you like it. Looking ahead. So today we focused on some things we can do to start revising. And this is very helpful if you are a poet on your own. You don't have a writing support group right now. We'll talk about developing that later. But you're kind of working solo and you want to be working on stuff, or you know that you're about to share your work with other readers, and this can be a great way to limber up for constructive feedback, kind of test and make sure you're ready to share. So you can use these different strategies in a lot of different ways. We will next look at how do we solicit feedback from people and what kind of feedback will we be looking for as poets and how can we share back with others. I hope that you enjoy taking a look at what you've been writing in this course so far and thinking about how you can deliberately manipulate different techniques we've explored and shape your poems so that they are sharing your visions with your readers.